All right, and I think with that we are live. We're live on YouTube. So welcome to my weekly office hours. I'm JDM, aka Josh David Miller, and I'm here every Thursday at 10 a.m. to answer all of your questions about startups. But today we're doing something a little bit different because it's Global Entrepreneurship Week. So I'm here with my buddy Cameron Law.
Hey, hey, hey.
Yo, yo. Welcome to YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook. We're all the places.
We're everywhere.
We are everywhere. Yes.
We want to hear about your business.
Yes, we do. So we got some questions today. We'll take whatever questions we have from the audience here, whatever questions you guys throw into the chat on whatever platform. So we'll do a little moderation there. But I want to start like 30,000 with you because we're sitting here in the Carlsen Center. So want to find out about you, want to find out about the Carlsen Center, want to find out about Global Entrepreneurship Week. So who the heck are you?
Who the heck am I? Well, I don't have a cool title like the shredder of business models. I'm the more of the gentler side of to take those shredded pieces of your business model and help you put them back together. So my name's Cameron Law, and I get to serve as the executive director here at the Carlsen Center. So this is our space here on campus at Sac State. And we work with students and community members in getting their ideas off the ground. So we really work from idea to seed stage is our main focus, but we do a lot of what we would call entrepreneurial ecosystem building, very jargony terms there, but one of the things that we do to advance supporting entrepreneurs is Global Entrepreneurship Week. And it's this week really to celebrate the role entrepreneurship plays in our community. We're actually joining an international campaign with that effort. So there's over 200 countries that are running this campaign around the globe, and we're really excited to have Sacramento and Sac State and the Carlsen Center topping some of the national leaderboards for events and activities run, and really speaking to how our entrepreneurial ecosystem is growing and really that density that we have to support entrepreneurs. So we're excited with that. And then just at a high level, did want to quickly recognize some of the sponsors for the week. Western Health Advantage is our title sponsor. They invested into the Carlsen Center about 4 years ago to ensure that this was a program that was a part of every Sac State student's journey. And then we had a title sponsor for our Spark Venture competition. So if you haven't checked that out on our LinkedIn, we had 4 startups walk away with cash awards. We gave out $20,000 at that.
And that was just last night, right?
That was probably less than maybe 12 hours ago now. No, I'm just kidding. It was maybe 14 or something like that. But really excited to see those winners and just 10 amazing pitches nonetheless. And then we just finished with a couple additional sponsors, Smug and Sand Hill Global Advisors are our startup sponsors, and the City of Roseville as our idea sponsors. So come out and celebrate. Today's day 4 of 5, event 2 on day 4, and I think this is event 2 of 5 or 6 today. So they're coming at you.
So we're right in the meaty part of the curve here.
There we are.
This is where the important shit happens.
So this is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, okay. So it's Global Entrepreneurship Week. So that's a bunch of cities, I'm assuming, around the world.
A bunch of countries around the world. Yeah. So it's basically, in the U.S. we have a pretty robust entrepreneurial ecosystem, and so from the United States level, we really compete at the city level and or region. Where some of the other, when we are on the global stage, it's more country to country in terms of activities. Right?
And how does Sacramento do relative to all of these others? Like, is everybody doing this many events? Like, it seems like you guys have a lot of events going on here.
Yeah, so we, as was sharing earlier, I think we're 4th in the country as a region for events and activities run, and that's right behind Kansas City, Philadelphia, some of these other big country cities. And then they also do partners as well. So like as an actual organization who's running the most amount of events. And so we are in that top 5 category as well. So, and then as a university, we're one of the top campaigns for just a university effort as well. So,
awesome.
And for me, when I think about it, it's really trying to bring our ecosystem to life, right? So we had Startup Happy Hour, 1 million cups, these things that are regular occurrences on a weekly or monthly basis to support entrepreneurs so they know they can go to those resources on a regular basis.
Awesome. Okay, cool. It just, in case you want to say hello, June Swatzel's online here.
June, she's a frequent flyer for us here.
She is.
Certainly virtually, but nonetheless a frequent flyer. We'll have to I was thinking we need to create like a frequent flyer program where you get
That'd
like
be great.
discounts into the Sacramento ecosystem. And it's like you attend a certain number of events, you earn a special badge or something.
I don't know what the badge earns you, but I feel like we could do something with this.
Yeah. What do they want?
Well, they want funding, so let's not give them that. Which actually takes us, I think, to our first question. And we'll, anytime you guys have questions, just throw your hand up. We'll go to one of these questions as well. Any questions you got in the chat here, we'll do there. June says congratulations on the top rating, so that's pretty cool. All right, so cool. So the question, and I get this an awful lot. You probably get the same question a million times too with everybody who passes the Carlsen Center, but it's like, will you connect me with an investor? Like that's the question I get. And you know, I work with startups that are kind of all over the place, right? Like my professionally, like from money, I work like with revenue wise, I work with startups like between seed and Series A. And so those ones, it's like, yeah, okay, you know, there's investor relationships and connections and things that happen. But the majority of people who actually ask me that question are pre-seed. And so it's actually not really fundable yet. And so I want to take this from two perspectives. I want to get your thoughts on it, but I first got to give.
They're going to be good. The two perspectives.
Well, this is going to be the shredding and then the putting back together that we usually have. Because my perspective, like usually my answer to this question is no, I will not, because you're not ready, and I don't want to be laughed at by my investor friends. And that sounds like horrible, but I want to like talk about that for a second. And I do actually want to, and then I do actually want to talk about maybe the stages of life cycle and funding, and we can hit that. So first the thing is, I think I have a couple thoughts on this. I'd be curious to hear yours as well. But one of the things that kind of bothers me about the way that startup founders, and I think it's in our culture, I think it's an us problem, not a them problem, but is they approach startups as like, it's our job to get investment. Like that's our mission. Our mission is to get to funding. And I don't think that that's true. Right? I think our mission is to get to customers who pay us money. And sometimes you have to raise money to do that, and other times you don't. You can, you know, what's called bootstrapping, where you can go without getting cash at all. But so when we get this this idea in our heads that it's about the funding, it just sort of changes everything that we're doing. We're starting to figure out, how do we get the great pitch decks? How do we get the great investor relationships, instead of the important question, which is how do we get a freaking customer? Which I think is the more important one. And I think a lot of people think, oh, I've got this great product, so now I just need money to run marketing. And so how do I get money for marketing? I get money for marketing by getting investment dollars, which an investor isn't going to do. Like, I mean, friends, family, and fools aside, like when it gets into institutional investment or serious angel investment, you're not going to get cash to run marketing on an untested idea. It just doesn't, it's just not a thing. So, you know, if you're really early on in that process, I think keep in mind that you're probably not fundable yet. And that there's a life cycle that you have to go through in order to get to fundable, which I think I'll let you expand on that, then we can talk about what that means to be fundable maybe.
Yeah, so I want to just take a step back to also kind of the question of, can you introduce me to your investors? And I think, you know, part of that is naturally there's relationships there, right? And so understanding that if you're not prepared for that meeting, that like, it's good for both of us not to introduce you at that time, right? Because I might, if I introduce you too early and they're like, what are you sending my way in terms of where this business is, then I lose that opportunity for future entrepreneurs or for you when you're ready at that time. And so really creating that understanding between the people that are some of those bridges to those investors, that is really actually when Josh is shredding and saying, no, you're not ready for that introduction, is that we're really helping you to make sure that you are prepared for that time. And so in terms of the question around getting fundable, I think there's, you know, different stages along that way. You know, if you're initially getting started doing that friends, family, and fools round, there's obviously a different level of what you need to demonstrate in terms of effort and energy and evidence around your business model. So have you done some of that customer discovery, understanding the like problem, right, and being able to somewhat validate that and say, hey, I have this potential solution that solves that, right? And a lot of times it might be to create that first iteration of whatever the thing might be. And so demonstrating those levels. But then when you get to those later stages, do you actually have traction to a degree? And that's, I use that term loosely because I know there's some harder definitions sometimes on that, but have you had demonstrated success with a customer base to be able to demonstrate that? And I think one of the things that I see founders not really get into is they think they pitch for the money, but not speak to what the money's getting them to in terms of the next milestone. So, right, we usually have the deck, the opportunity, the ask, the investment, whatever it is. And it's like, oh, 25% is going to go to sales, 25% is going to go to product development. That's great, but what does that get you to in terms of a milestone for your business? Like, what does that unlock? Are you going to now get your first prototype done that you're going to get in the hands of 10 piloting customers? Or are you going to use those resources to get your first, go from 1,000 customers to 10,000 customers, right? And so being able to speak to the strategic milestone and how that will get you to the next level of funding it if you need it.
Totally. And I think a lot of times what I see is that the founders who are trying to particularly just buy customers, like early stage, use investment dollars to buy customers, is that they just come up with these like bullshit numbers, you know, and because they don't know how to come up with real numbers because they can't, they're not ready to come up with real numbers yet. Like, I mean, I don't mean them as people, I mean the business isn't ready for real numbers. So they'll say like, oh, we have this, you know, this obtainable market, it's like this size, and we're going to convert 3%, and therefore, you know, this dollars and this many ads, and therefore converting at 3% gets us this money. And it's like, well, but you just made all this shit up. Like, you have no evidence to show that you're going to convert at 3%. It's ridiculous. And first of all, nobody converts at 3%. Like when you start throwing ads into a new market, like that's not a thing. Let's just throw that aside. But so then you end up with these like this completely fake answer that just does that you already know doesn't make sense. It's not like you think it makes sense. You know it doesn't make sense. You know that you made up the number, and so like still trying to like raise capital off of like a completely bullshit number. It just doesn't make sense. And the way that you know it doesn't make sense is because you didn't have any mechanism by which to come up with a real answer. And the mechanism by which you come up with the real answer is actually putting things in front of customers and seeing what resonates and actually capturing data, right? The evidence that you were talking about, like to scale up from there.
Yeah, and that, you know, naturally that evidence is just on different levels at different stages as well, right? And sometimes there's a little bit more ambiguity within that, right? So it's like, what comes to mind, especially because we work with like really early idea stage, right? It's like, oh, we surveyed 100 people. It was like, well, and you gave them yes or no questions. Did you really get that like evidence to prove it, right? And I think one of the things is you don't want to sell a lie because that's likely going to be a failure for you anyways, right? And so thinking of it, yes, you're taking someone's money and want to utilize those resources to create your business, but if it's built on something that you know doesn't actually have strong evidence, it's like that house of cards analogy, right? It's like, oh, you just pull one of those out and now your business model falls because you didn't do the foundational work to do that.
Yeah, totally. And I think, you know, one of the ways that you can kind of pivot away from that trap is to, instead of saying, okay, we're going to go survey 100 customers, which is like fine, I guess, like it's fine. I mean, surveys are shit. And like, I mean, they are like, they're just like, okay, all right. I didn't mean like fully, I went full Joe Pesci there at the end of that, you know, that was not intentional. But
I bring you back sometimes, I bring you back.
You do, yeah, it's good. You know, we're not professional pollsters. We're just not, right? And we're not getting statistically significant sample sizes, right? And therefore, we're not getting interesting results. We're not doing quantitative research. We just can't right now. We don't even know who the customer is. We don't know who the product is. We don't know how to line those up. So all that stuff is made up. And then on top of that, we're just asking bad questions. And so like I'm really not a fan of surveys. I'm a big fan of customer interviews, like talking to customers, you know, and like talking to 100 customers is amazing. Like you should absolutely do that. But then it's like, okay, so now we start getting these signals, this like qualitative research that there's a there. The way to start translating that into evidence is to start looking for buying behavior. Right? And so that's when you start pivoting into like, okay, so they're saying that they have their problem, they're saying this is interesting, and what is the next step if this were a real business, which we'll pretend it's not, because it's usually not at that stage, right? And so if it's a real business, what would be the next thing that they would do? Would it be them clicking an ad? Would it then be typing in their email address? Would it then be signing up? Would it be them be paying us money? Like what's the next stage? And then actually getting them to get that signal. And like, so this is really true. I'm probably gonna be writing about this in my newsletter next week because I've seen it a lot lately and this is really cool. But I've had, I think, around 9 or 10 teams, brand new startups in the last couple of months, the last 2 months, go from idea to revenue in about 24 hours. And it seems like ridiculous. It does seem ridiculous, but it's actually not. These, when I see these companies I'm working with, these are people that I said a few words to and then they went off and did the work. I'm not saying I did this with 9 companies, whatever. It's actually not that complicated. And it's a whole wide range of things where you can do this with. People think that you have to do this with something that you can sell right away. It's not true. You can pre-sell software, you can crowdfund, you can, I actually had a co-working space do this a couple of weeks ago, and when I say a co-working space, I mean an idea for a co-working space. Like, they didn't have a building, like they didn't have anything yet, but they were like, oh, we're going to create this co-working space for artists. And we're gonna have like artists in residence, like we have entrepreneurs in residence, that kind of thing. So we're gonna do that kind of thing. And it'll be a space for artists. And so to test interest, they did a bunch of customer interviews. And then they actually designed a membership program and pre-sold memberships for this thing that are fully refundable if they don't build it, but they're actually testing buying behavior. Well, people give them money to actually get started with this thing. And you can do it with software as well. And that I see all the time. And like all these things you can do in less than 24 hours. It doesn't take that much. And you're looking for, again, like buying behavior, actually wanting to do something. If you can't get the actual money, you can do a step before that and actually get letters of intent, particularly if you're doing B2B, right? And if you can't get either one of those things, then it's like, okay, well, what is the signal right before that? And the further back you go, the weaker the signal is. But there's still not somebody said, yeah, I buy that for $10.99 in a survey, because it's just like, it's shit. Like, it doesn't mean anything. But you can get that real data, and then that's real data. Like, I love the story of Masterclass. And are you familiar with how they got started?
Sort of. Yeah, and they go ask people if they wanted like these types of classes, and
yeah, exactly. So like, this is one of my favorite stories for like getting started in that early stuff, is that he's like, okay, I think people will want, I think it was chefs. I think that was his initial thing. Okay, good. So he's like, I forget his name, I apologize, but he was like, okay, I'll go out and talk to a bunch of people who want to learn how to cook from chefs, like home cooks who want to learn from real chefs. And so he went out and I think he got more than 1,000 home cooks who wanted to learn from chefs to not just give them an email address, but give them an email address, a phone number, their mailing address, like more information than you would give if you were just passively interested, but not so it's a buying signal, but a weakish one, but a buying signal nonetheless. They got more than 1,000 of them. So then he went to chefs, like famous chefs, or these really talented chefs, and then talked to them and said, hey, I got this list of 1,000 people. They want to learn from you how to do this. And then he worked with them because now he had this captivated, interested party. Said, let's figure out how we do this. And he used that conversation to figure out how the correct way to monetize it would be, like what's going to make it interesting for the chefs. And then he got the chefs to say yes, got letters of intent from the chefs. So now he's got 1,000 customers stacked up on the consumer side. He's got a couple of chefs with basically letters of intent. Then he took that to an investor and said, all I got to do is build the thing. And frankly, that's pretty easy, right? And they paid him to build it because he had this robust evidence. And so you can do that by getting as far along that buying signal spectrum as you can.
I love it.
Yeah.
I don't have much else to add on to that one. The one thing that comes to mind there is there's a local company called Trifecta Nutrition, and one of the things that they do on their page in a way that they kind of were early tracking to see if people were interested was they would set it up as an initial free thing, but it was you had to put in a bunch of information about your health. So it was like, I have a male and I want to lose X number of pounds. I want this type of diet, these types of things, and it'd be like, hey, here's a free PDF, which then would trigger kind of that buying signal of them wanting to do that. So how many people actually went through with all of the questions to get the templated PDF back, right? And so there's certain things that you can do to have different value units come back to you, right? It doesn't always have to be a payment at that early stage. One of the things I wanted to quickly go back to with the customer discovery, I think a lot of times we want to certainly steer away from like guiding the conversation to what we're trying to build and having it more open-ended and understanding the problem. I think the reason, for me that's so powerful is one of the biggest things I hope you would walk away with from those discovery conversations is the language people use to talk about it, right? It's not just, did I check a certain box? It was, I asked them the question around the problem in this way, and they used a different set of language to talk about it, right? And now that gives me a better frame for the next time I talk to a potential customer. Now I might have better language that resonates with them that then ultimately becomes your marketing material in the future.
Totally, like customers will tell you like how to sell them stuff. It's amazing.
I have an example for, and we've kind of used this on our website. It was about 1.5 years ago, we had a bunch of the students come in and just say, hey, when you thought of initially coming to the Carlsen Center, what were you hoping to get out of it? And there was like business plan and like all this language that like we never had business plan because we teach business models, right? And so it was like a student who didn't necessarily know they wanted to they knew they wanted to maybe create a startup, but they thought initially business plan, and that was not in any of our keywords or anything because we don't really teach business plans. And so it, then gave us on that back end to be able to look at that and say, hey, we can help you with that. We don't teach necessarily a traditional business plan, but we can use that language that then most resonates with them.
My regular viewers know how I feel about business plans, so I've ranted before. But I think we had a couple of questions from the audience here, so yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I like your shoes, by the way.
Thank
They're
you.
pretty cool.
He likes my shoes.
You have to tell me where you bought them.
These are Allbirds, man.
I should have worn mine today.
You should have. You should have worn. We could have been Allbirds buddies here.
What are they called?
Allbirds, like not some of the birds, but all of the birds.
Oh.
Allbirds. They're like basically socially acceptable slippers that you can run in.
Yeah.
They're very comfortable. They have a few different styles. These are, I think, is it street runners there.
Right. So my question, I guess, is regarding sales and growth and marketing and all that good stuff, because that's the bottom line, right? I mean, you can have the best product or service in the world, but if you can't get in front of clients or customers or people to buy that product or service from you, it's like it means nothing really. So, do you have any ideas, thoughts on how sales ideas other than, I guess, or maybe the ones we kind of already know, maybe a different way of approaching, I don't know if it's social media, because that's where a lot of people spend a lot of time, or is it like a specific platform? Like what ideas do you have? And specifically, if you have, it looks like you have a lot of experience with entrepreneurship and startups and whatnot. So specifically IT services, because that's the business we're in.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any ideas when it comes specifically to IT services and how, I feel like once I get my foot in the door and I'm in front of that decision maker, the closing rate is very high, but it's like getting that foot in the door and getting in front of the right people. Where should I be spending a lot of time?
Right. Okay. Let's see. I'm not sure how much of that it picked up, so I'll see if I can repeat part of it back. All right. So the question is on like sales and marketing and creative ways to do that. You're in the IT services business, and there's a sales component to that as well. So to kind of come at this from a couple of sides, like I'm not a sales expert. That's not my forte. My expertise is in traction and startup traction. So I'm also not a marketing strategist, but I use marketing tactics all the time in go-to-market, which is something I am more of an expert in. So I'm going to kind of come at it from that perspective. And a couple things. First is there's the big question, it sounds like, is how do you get in front of the customer? Because it sounds like you're okay once you do.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then that's great. So I'm going to give you a couple hacks. So the first one, we'll talk about growth hacking second, because that's the one everybody's like, oh, growth hacking, and it's kind of, I don't know, warped into a weird like mystical thing. It's not. It's actually like super dumb, but it's great. So we'll talk about growth hacking in just a second, and then, but before that, I think the biggest thing is, you have to just start figuring out, where can I find customers? Like, where are they and what's going to resonate with them? And the only way to do that is by starting to articulate and as specific a level as possible who exactly the customer is. And so it's like IT services for whom and like in what level, what does that look like? And, so on and so forth. So that's when you start creating, what we call ICPs, your ideal customer persona, and, where you create these like semi-fictional representations of a real customer. And so you usually give them a name, this would be, founder Frank, or let's say, what kind of a company do you serve?
Our target market?
Yeah.
Small to medium-sized businesses, SMB vertical.
Okay, so SMBs. So let's say that, so like SMB is kind of a broad category, but you could say that you're working with small, like blue collar service SMB business or something like that. Then you'd have, I don't know, Roofer Rich or something like that would be like, the name of your ICP or something like that, or Gutter Glen or whatever. That sounds very offensive. But whatever, right? So you create this name for them, and then you like list out what their interests are, what their wants, needs, and fears are. Who their influencers are, because that's actually pretty important too. Influencers meaning people, but also meaning publications, places, wherever that they actually pay attention. It could be trades, it could be newspapers, it could be online media, whatever that they read. And then also talk about what their aspirations are. And you kind of get this really detailed thing, in addition to the obvious stuff of like demographics and psychographics and so forth. And so when you create this really ideal customer persona, you start saying, okay, so now I know that when I'm crafting a message, I'm talking to Glenn, or I'm talking to Rich, or I'm talking to whoever. And now you have a person that you can say, well, if I draft out this message, will this message resonate with that person? And you can ultimately test that. But by putting it down as a really specific person that you're trying to talk to, you can usually intuit what kinds of messages will just like pass right over them. And one of the problems that virtually all maybe early stage startup founders, and you can correct me from your experience here, but that they have is that they'll try to talk to everybody because they don't want to exclude anybody. And because they're like, well, we don't know who our customer is yet, so we don't want to be telling people no. It's like, no, you absolutely want to be telling people no. Like that's exactly what you want to be doing, because marketing's all about exclusion. You know, to talk to everybody is to talk to no one, to paraphrase Alexander the Great. So then you want to get really, really specific, and the more specific you get, you're gonna be like, oh, well, that's not gonna resonate with him because, you know, he's a blue collar worker and this is the kind of message, you know, that kind of thing. So that you can get really specific. The growth hacking thing is the thing that's probably most helpful. So if you want to figure out like, how do I get in front of my customers? It's a 3-step process. So growth hack is 3 steps, and then I'll give an example. So 3 steps. First is you have to list every single place that your customers hang out. So this would be, when I say hang out, I mean online, I mean in person, I mean the places that they read, the people that they follow on TikTok, the hashtags that they might be you know, following on Twitter. It could be the groups that they're involved in on Facebook. It could be you know, anything like that. You know, absolutely every single place where their eyeballs are going. So you get a big list, and it's not 2 or 3 or 4, it's 20 or 30 of these places. We call those channels, right? So you list out all of these channels, and it's one of those ways you want to get a little creative with them too, because a lot of them are kind of unexpected. And again, if you have that ideal persona kind of drawn out, a lot of those will kind of surface on their own. And the rest, when you do customer interviews, you can actually ask them, like, where do you get news? Where do you get your information? Like, where do you you know, get your IT information or resources or whatever? Anyway, so you create the big list, step 1. Step 2 is now you have all these channels, now you want to rank them. So you rank them based on 2 factors. So you give them 2 scores, and you can do it like 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10, whatever makes sense. But the first ranking that you give them is how many customers are there. So, you know, if it's a TikTok influencer, how many followers do they have? That kind of thing. If it's a store that they frequent, and they all go into the store to buy whatever, it's how many eyeballs like pass through the store. How many people are in the Facebook group? How many readers does the publication have? All that kind of stuff. Like literally, how many customers can you actually encounter in that space? So you rank them on that. The second ranking is how easy is it to get in front of those eyeballs? And so if it's really hard, that might be like, well, there's this TikTok influencer, and it'd be awesome to like, this is probably a terrible example since you're working in IT services, so probably not on TikTok, but you know, it's like, okay, this TikTok, you know, influencer has a ton of people, which is cool, and they have tons and tons and tons of eyeballs, but they're, you know, how are you going to get in front of influencers? I've never met them. I don't know them. I could DM them, but like, is that going to do anything? You know, I was like, that's not going to work. But then it's like, well, what happens if instead that you actually knew them, or you knew somebody who knew them? That makes it much easier. So you rank them on how easy it is to get in front of them. So once you take those 2 rankings, you put them on this like XY axis, this grid, like 4 squares. And so you have the ones that have small audiences that are easy to get in front of. It's like, okay, maybe that's a quick win. Like maybe I can get in front of some people pretty fast. And then you have like, okay, then above that, you have the ones that are really hard to get in front of them, and there's not very many customers there anyway. Like, why would you do that, right? That's not going to pay off. Then you have the ones that are like really big audiences and really hard to get in front of. And so for those, it's like, well, that's a moonshot. Maybe it's going to be a lot of effort, but it would pay off. Then you have this last quadrant, which is the ones that are tons of people and that are really easy to get in front of. Those are the ones that you want to target because there's tons of eyeballs for relatively little effort. So I told you to come back to an example. So one of the more famous examples was Airbnb. So in the early days of Airbnb, they had some rental properties listed. Some of them came from their network. Some of them just came from the marketing hub. They had a few properties on there. But it was like they didn't really get the eyeballs of the customers, and they're never going to grow on the property side until they get the eyeballs from the customers, and they're not going to get the eyeballs from the customers until they have more properties. So that's the standard platform chicken egg problem. And so they said, okay, well, what can we do to kind of hack our way into that? So they said, well, where are we can find property owners manually. Like we could get some that way. We can find them. They're not a big group. Whereas the people who rent is a massive group. So they said, let's set those aside for a second. And let's see how we find the actual renters. And so they said, well, at that time, all of the renters, everybody looking for properties on Craigslist, they're looking for a property on Craigslist. So like, well, that's interesting. So they said, how hard is it to get in front of an audience on Craigslist? And as it turns out, Craigslist has, or probably still has, an API. And so they said, oh, well, this is interesting. So what they did is they said, okay, if you list your property on Airbnb, we will use the API behind the scenes to automatically post that property to Craigslist. That way it's going where the eyeballs already are. And the call to action link will take them right back to Airbnb. So so anytime they sign somebody up on the renting side, the property owner side, it would automatically get in front of the eyeballs. And then Airbnb would also get the audiences of those who are interested to come onto the Airbnb platform to complete the transaction, right? Because Craigslist was a place where they're all hanging out and it was relatively easy. We're talking about a day of dev work or something like that to get in, get in front of them. So that's kind of growth hacking. So you go through that same exercise for you and you figure out where are all the customers, where are the ones that are really easy to get in front of. Let me run it. And then, so that was step 1 and 2. Step 3 was the experiment. And this is what I kind of just described with Craigslist, but you put, you list all the channels, rank them on their difficulty and the number of people. And then third is you actually run an experiment on the channel and see what happens. And you find out, is the messaging resonating? Are the people there? Are they doing whatever? So.
And to add on to that, they used South by Southwest as one of their key areas. So on the other side of that, the user side, I believe they utilized those properties, knowing people were coming into South by Southwest and were going to be needing to rent those properties. So that was kind of where they targeted that effort. So knowing that as one of that big easy channel was there's going to be an influx of all these people coming in for that.
Right. And it's a strategy that we see a lot, in successful startups. It's not always an API.
Yeah. The only thing I would add onto that was I think it sounds like from me that you need to narrow down the like small, medium-sized business, right? That's a pretty large swath. That's, even the SBA definition of a small business is from like 1 to like 1,000 employees or up to like 5 million in revenue. And so where it's that kind of like niche focus is a certain type of business that needs the IT service, because that's going to change the channels you use, the language you use to talk about it. And then the last element that I would want to talk about is that you really your goal is to build this engine for growth, right? And JDM does much better on talking about kind of this customer factory, but once you've identified the channel and the language you're going to use, then it becomes much easier to just replicate that cycle. And so then when you do get investment, or if you need a loan or whatever, or if you just use customers to fund that, you now know where you're going to put your dollar. Is like, oh, I don't need to buy ads on Facebook anymore. I know my customers are actually on Reddit channels, so I just need to spend money on someone to write content to put on Reddit, and that's where they're getting their answers, right? So then you're like building that. How much money you're putting in, basically how many customers are going to be put through that system.
Totally. We got a question from the interwebs here. So this is from the Library of Musiclandria, which I'm guessing is a pun from the Library of Alexandria. So kind of cool. So it's hi JDM, do you have any advice or resource suggestions for planning to grow from 1 location or store to 2 locations or 2 locations to more? It's kind of a big semi-general question there. So I'll first start by saying that I am not a Main Street business expert. So I'm more of an expert in scalable startups. So I want to caution with that. So I'm going to answer probably a little bit more generically. And I know, Cameron, you kind of straddle the line sometimes to the Main Street. So I'm sure you have thoughts too. You want to get started, or you want me to?
No, you
Okay. All right. So I think that the first thing first is, for me, it's demand. Like that's the first question I have is do you have evidence of sufficient demand for location number 2? So I'm assuming by this question, location number 1 is doing well. That's all great. And so now the way to grow, or the hypothesis is that the way to grow is by adding another location, because we're capped by the geography, physical presence, real estate space, staff, whatever that one location has. And so we're going to add another one so we can basically our way of increasing capacity. And so that's okay. So that's great. Like, congratulations on location 1 being successful. That's awesome. So then when it comes to location number 2, it's like, okay, so now the question is, we have, I think there's probably 2 different pieces. There's probably a lot more than that, but 2 pieces come to mind. The first one is like, we want to go, okay, we need to go to a place where we have evidence of demand, so we don't want to gamble on that. So how do we find evidence of demand in the second location? How you do that is probably pretty specific to what the business is. So if you're like, I'll just use a random example that clearly doesn't apply to you, but if you're a restaurant or something like that, one of the ways that I've had buddies in the restaurant industry do this too, where they will do like a food truck pop-up type of thing in location number 2, to see like to gain interest, to get to see if they get people in there. If there's a really wide geographic just difference there, like Sacramento to Los Angeles or to New York City or something like that, then that probably doesn't apply as much. But that was a way to test demand and see if people would be interested in that in the other location. So there's that, like, does their demand, do all the financials support it, all the, go back to pirate metrics, customer factor, like, does all that make sense? And the second thing is like, okay, we have an operations scaling question too. And so that's, I think, the part that is probably pretty interesting as well, is like, what does a location number 2 look like? And what does that change back on location number 1? Is this just something where we just copy all the staff and we're gonna do exactly what we did the first time? Or is this a case, and I see this a lot again in restaurants, where the first location's success was largely tied to the number of, or the amount of attention that the founder themselves had in the location. And so now when you scale location number 2, you're starting to divide that attention. So now you have to have a plan to basically, like, succession planning, if you will, to get the founder out of those operations so that you can be more focused on running, the 2 different things. And this is often that, in the business versus on the business thing, being more intentional about that. So again, that would probably depend on the business, but those are the 2 big things that I would look at for that. What do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think those are great elements of the demand and operation side. I think the one thing I would add on the demand side is thinking through, what is the difference in demographics of the space from point 1 to point 2? Is it a same community that you're creating the space? I don't know exactly what the business is, but are you targeting the same type of customers, and does it have the same amount of density of that customer segment that you're looking at, right? Or does this space need to take on a different brand, under a larger group, right? And so I think your point is right on with the diffusing some of your customers, right? It was like, oh, well, like, maybe some of your customers went out of their way to go to this place, and now there's another one closer, and so you didn't actually gain new customers. You just took a customer from another area, and now you've increased the cost to acquire that customer, basically, right? Because it's 2 times to have that same person come. For me, the biggest thing is really that operations element, right? Is like, now you're reinvesting significant amount of energy and effort. I think there are opportunities that, I think I'm naturally in a restaurant, you can have more maybe economies of scale in, purchasing more product. If you're, buying beef or something, you could buy more quantity because you have that purchasing power. That's one of the pros that I would see. But I think JDM pretty hit it on the head with the demand and operations. But I would just think, what are the 2 differences of that? And there's one tool, if you're in the greater Sacramento region, our economic council, so it's called Greater Sacramento Economic Council. They have a tool called Size Up that you can actually type in the type of business that you're creating, and it will speak to how many people, basically what the market size is for that particular area. And I believe it could be even from the city to even maybe the zip codes that you'd be looking at. So you could start to see how much money is being spent on that type of thing.
Cool. So they actually just replied. Okay, so they said that they're a library of music instruments. So I asked them what the business model was. See if we can get a little more specific. It says free instrument loans, but also concerts, recordings, and a radio station. Oh, that's a lot. Okay, so I'm assuming if you're part radio station, I don't know if you're replicating radio station, that would imply that you're a greater distance away. But free instrument loans, but also concerts. Okay, yeah. So there's a big puzzle there, but I think.
So yeah, I think it's, I guess it kind of goes to like, what's the intent in growing, right? Is it, you have music. I'm thinking of like music rentals. Was like, hey, in the greater Sacramento region, someone's renting in Rockland and they have to drive all the way back to Sacramento to rent it. And so it's like, oh, that's a big barrier to someone using it versus, hey, we have these other satellite places that it's easier now to come return a rental or get access to it. And so maybe it helps from some of that, like being loaned out type of things. But yeah, I think it's like, what's the intent in growing? Is it just to increase revenues, even though, likely the profitability from some of that initially might not be there because you're standing up a whole new spot?
Yeah, and along the same lines, there's also like a digital play to be made here too. It's like, is it how critical are the physical locations, to this? I understand, musical instruments can be large and heavy, which makes shipping difficult, but there's no aspect of this that literally can't work, without geographic boundaries, which could be interesting. And it's not a price point thing either. Like, there's a lot of really successful, for example, camera rental businesses where they rent glass, lenses for cameras. They'll rent actual camera bodies and other camera equipment out, and they ship them. And there's a whole process they have for doing that. Shipping will probably be more expensive here, but so it's like, okay, is the second physical location strictly necessary to bring in these other elements, or are there other ways to explore innovating on the business model to try to expand again, operations to for more money, so to oversimplify. Cool. Do we have another question from here? Yeah.
I had a quick question. You guys are talking about whether using data to kind of prep your deck for investment, things like that. And then two questions. The first question was, how do you not fall in the trap of having fake things, if that makes sense? And then using maybe you don't have enough customer data at this point, how can you better gain more data to be able to then reach that customer goal that you're trying to sell to? And for example, the customer is wanting something but they're not needing it yet. What are some strategies or ways you can better get to that customer and find out what is that need for them?
Got it. Okay. So you said quick question, and I have no idea what made you think that was a quick question. But that's I think
Question means long question.
Well, there's like 14 questions in there, man. All right. They were all good ones, but there's like 14 of them in there. Okay. Let's see if I can get all those back. So I heard when you're, so this is going back to our earlier conversation about data in the context of pitching for investment and all that stuff. And so the first one was, how do you avoid fake metrics or vanity metrics or that kind of thing? I think we usually call them vanity metrics in this space. So there's that one. That's a really good question. Could do a whole TED talk on that one. That would be fun. So we have that.
We have a stage here for you if you want.
Oh, should I I'm just gonna launch right into this. Vanity metrics and all that stuff is interesting. So I'll definitely come back to that in just a second. And then the next question you had was had to do with buying behavior and whether or not, if you have, if customers are saying that they want something but don't need it yet. I think I'll want one more piece of detail on that. So think about maybe you can make it more specific, to your actual company if you want to. But so there's that. And then what was the third piece?
Those are the main two.
Those are the main two. Yes. All right. Cool. So while think about the second one, because we'll probably need to get a little more level, more specific. But on the vanity metric side, and it's really smart of you to call that out because it's a really big problem actually in the startup space a lot. And I gave this example of bullshit numbers earlier, but the flip side of that is these things called vanity metrics, where you're looking at things that aren't important and that seem interesting and seem fun, but actually aren't important. And one of the things I'll say that's actually a little bit controversial, or may sound controversial, but isn't in my world, is that revenue is often a vanity metric. And I'm like, wow, that revenue is all that matters. And it's like, well, yeah, it does. Once you've figured out everything and all you got to do is get revenue, right? And all it's about scale, then yeah, revenue is probably one of the most important indicators for you. But when you're really early on and you're trying to figure out who is my customer, where are they exactly, what does the solution look like, and you're hunting for product market fit, revenue is probably not the right metric. You're trying to figure out, do customers have this problem? Who are the customers that have this problem? What is the message that resonates with them? And how do I get them on this process? And none of those things are going to be told by revenue, because revenue involves 14 steps, right, to get the customer to sign the check. And if all you're ever looking at is that the customer that signs the check, you're not actually looking at the things that matter now. And there's a process for that we call innovation accounting. And the idea is if you were to have this chain of leading indicators, in order to get the revenue, because ultimately we care about the revenue, right? In order to get to the revenue, we have to get customers activating. In order to get customers activating, we have to get them, acquired into our product. In order to get them acquired into our product, we have to understand where they are and get a message in front of them that resonates. In order to get a message in front of them that resonates, they have to want the solution that we want. They have to want a solution. They have to have the problem. They have to be on the platform, right? There's this whole chain of indicators that if any one of them are wrong, we're not going to hit the revenue. And so just measuring revenue isn't telling us how to learn along that process. So we have to go back basically at the soonest point in time where we don't have enough data and start saying, let's look at those. And you still create the whole chain and then say, here's what we want revenue to look like at the end of it, because that's our hypothesis. And you want to make sure that you're chasing something that's like worth your time, right? So you have that measurement. But then when you go back here, you're looking at, this is the part that matters here. So we're going to get these. And then you start measuring, can we get in front of customers? Can we get them clicking? Can we get them engaging? Because that's what actually matters right now. The revenue doesn't matter, because we'll either get the revenue later or we won't. But right now, this is the thing we can look at. And one of the things we talk about with investment decks a lot is that you set up these really bad expectations with investors sometimes, or we do it, I mean you specifically. We set up really bad expectations with investors sometimes when we, particularly at the angel stage, like at the seed stage, or pre-seed stage, when we collect revenue and saying that okay, here's our, you were talking about before, use of funds, right? Because that's something you have to include in that. So we'll say our use of funds, and then they'll put the use of funds as like a revenue target, when the revenue target's kind of a guess and there's a lot of assumptions baked into it. And so then when you miss that revenue target, the investors are like, what the hell, man? You told me you're going to miss this revenue target. Now you got to explain well, we actually had all these amazing learnings. Yeah, but you told me you were going to be at $1 million in revenue and you're not. Yeah, but we have all these amazing learnings. But the revenue though, right? And that's because you set the expectation. So instead you say you can share the model and say we're looking to get these, because you only want to work with investors that are savvy enough to understand this anyway. So you can share the whole model, but you say, this is the thing that we're testing right now. Our use of funds is to figure out, can we get customers into our funnel and activated? And then we'll figure out the revenue side later, because then you're putting out the actual metric that makes sense for it to actually be measured on. And you're setting the expectation with the investor that the revenue target isn't that's what we're hoping that this will lead to, but the thing that we're learning from isn't the revenue target. It's are we getting customers into the funnel in the first place?
Yeah, I think I'll just add, it goes back to kind of the point earlier was when we have the vanity metrics and we're using that to raise funds, that means we don't really have the model built, right? And so you're asking for funds to say, I'm going to invest in this thing to get this, right? So if we're saying we're going to invest this money into this replicable model that I'm telling you I have that I don't actually have, I'm going to get to this revenue, right? And so then it'd be well, you give me $1 million, it's going to mean I've gotten to this many institutions, when we don't know that that's actually true because we haven't built the model in that way, versus if this money is going to allow us to get to this many people in our funnel because we've been testing this, and then we're working on how many will convert, and then that's the next metric that we're going to work on, right? And so it's how do you work across that system to say, okay, we have a solid amount of evidence at understanding the problem and the need for this customer segment. Where we learned that they use this channel, but we don't actually fully know now what value proposition resonates with them. And so we're testing the way that looks, and that they come to our website, and that if we change this type of language, they're now going to be actually downloading or signing a letter of intent or whatever that might be. And so then that's where your money will be, hey, we're going to make sure that we get this value proposition in front of them to then say, hey, they're all going to engage in pilots with us. And then that then turns into revenue when you've gotten that model. That's just an example, but I think the key is with the vanity metrics, we don't actually know where that investment would go.
Well said. Well said. So okay, with this, you're going to.
I was just gonna say, I've just been hanging around you too much. So I just take some of the things that you probably
mostly
said.
we just get together and make shit up, and then we're like, yeah, we learned this together.
Vanity metrics.
That's right. That's right. It's all that matters. So back on the second question, can you get more specific?
Yeah. So one of the questions I was trying to break down what I was thinking and what I was trying to say with that. I think what I was trying to understand is what if your customer has multiple needs for your product, for example, specific to my business, right? One of the things that we're dealing with is that there's a lot of different value propositions as to why someone might buy the product, but there's not one singular reason why someone is I need this product right now because it's going to have this X amount of impact on my institution or my bottom line, or how much money I'll be saving. How do you find and kind of narrow down that? And is that something you can do when the product maybe has multiple value propositions to it.
Right. Okay. So the question is like when you have multiple value props, like how do you narrow in on the one early stage that's going to actually convert?
Yeah.
Right. So that's I mean,
Can I add to the question? I think part of it too is, and just knowing where the business is and what it is I think part of.
Feel free to drop some deets.
So Srinjay from Buzzly, I think part of the question is if an institution or a university was to invest in the solution of Buzzly, it's not like the ROI is like, I saved $1,000 today because I now cut this out of my process. There's like longitudinal impacts, or it takes time for that to happen, right? And so it's like, oh, day one we signed up for Buzzly is not like 100% increase in engagement of resources. There's time that it would take for that to be realized, and so I think that's part of the context of that question is like in terms of the value prop, it might not be realized instantaneous, like, oh, I bought this thing equals yay happiness, if that makes sense.
I'm gonna get working with the culture of the company and the kind of value proposition with the culture. I think a value proposition in that itself.
Right. So I think when you have a lot of value props that maybe don't resonate immediately, I think that there's just two different things to consider there. So one is the value prop resonating at all, and then the second part is the time it takes to realize the value proposition. And I don't think that those two things are I don't think those should be as correlated as maybe we're implying that they are. Because if they recognize the value proposition, that doesn't mean that they have to realize it immediately. This is an expectations versus reality game, right? If you're saying you're going to get this on day one and they don't, that's bad. But if you're saying like this is a thing and this is what that path looks like in using Buzzly, Buzzly services universities, so that's a little context about like so. And so like when you're talking to like massive institutions like that, I don't think that their expectation is that they're going to have a massive savings on day one or savings of time or energy or maybe a big impact or whatever. But it's do they want that impact, and can you articulate what that path looks like to get to that point? And are there other measures or metrics or signals that you can look at in there that give them those things? So this will bleed into, there's like value prop part here, but this will bleed into like the user experience part, which is how once you get them engaged and starting with the platform, can you start to imply or signal the value that you're creating before you ever actually get to it. So if you say that like the money is being saved because X, Y, and Z happened, right? Then you can start like giving them these hints that they're seeing X, Y, and Z. It's the same thing as the vanity metrics, right? Same things like those innovation accounting is that you're starting to poke at, this is the thing. And so instead of you're kind of selling the big win, but you're also selling them this roadmap to get there. And then you can give them signals along the way that they're getting it. Well, I don't think we're talking about culture right now. I think I don't think we're really talking about culture here. We're just talking about value props and how they might resonate. But so yeah, I think that's probably one way. The other thing I would say too is like you do want to find a value prop that so like one of the mistakes that a lot of founders make, when they're trying to find the right value proposition with a customer is when they start looking at like the pains that they have. So they focus on ones that don't have this like golden combination of urgency and severity, and both of those things are really important. And so I see this it really plagues B2B all the time. So like, this is the story. They'll say, okay, like I'm talking to all these customers, like they're doing customer interviews, right? I'm talking to all these customers, these businesses are like, yeah, man, this problem sucks. It's like, right? And it's costing us money, and they can quantify how much money it's costing them. And then they never close the deal. And they're like, well, what the hell? Like every customer I talk to is like, this problem sucks and it's huge, and they can quantify this big pot of money that it's costing to do it. And yet this like 5% of that cost that we're charging for this thing, they won't close. Like, why won't they close? Why won't they close? And it's because the thing that they're missing is urgency. And it's because it's a big problem, but it's not problem number one, it's problem number 4. And they're just not going to give it the time of day because problems 1, 2, and 3 are above it, right? And so there's like a way to you have to think about like that. What of these like whole problem set are the ones that they really want to solve urgently? And if I were to guess, the kind of money that Buzzly is saving universities is probably not enough for that to be like a really big thing for them. Like, it's great. It's a thing. Like, it definitely goes on the, like, they say everybody likes to save money, right? So like, it goes on the thing, but that's, I don't know enough to say for sure, but like, it's probably not the big thing. There's probably another thing in there that is a more urgent problem for them to focus on that they feel a little bit more severely.
Yeah, I actually think, Chris, sorry, I'm going to answer the question here. So one of the things that when I think of Buzzley that maybe you could focus on a little bit more is that actually nationally university, the rates of attendance is decreasing. So like universities and they, or enrollment, sorry, if that's the right term, enrollments are decreasing nationally. And that's naturally how universities get their budget, is based on enrollment. And so if one of those elements is the retention of current students, which you're maintaining revenue of students that are already here, and then also that if you have the sense of community on campus, that increases enrollment opportunity because there's this connectivity. And so then now that's, oh, we're going to get more students and we're going to keep them here, versus we're going to save you time and money on you marketing to students. That's maybe less of an interest versus like, hey, this is a big money problem. Sac State's unique that we actually, our enrollment has barely been increasing, but that retention is a key element of those types of those students. So I think framing that context, and I just think partly in, because where you've seen your success is getting users, right? And the users drives what your value proposition is. I think that could just be teed up like, hey, here's the problem. Universities are in this space. They have this issue. We've been able to get users on, that's keeping people on campus, blah, 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 using resources. And that's why you should invest in Buzzley in terms of a customer, because we're going to bring this to your campus.
Cool. We could definitely talk more about that.
Amazing professionalism as a value proposition I'm trying to go towards.
Got it. Well, we're almost out of time here. We're just about at the top of the hour. Let's see. I'm just cycling through here. So this was probably in reference to you, Sanjay, but June was asking, what evidence do you have to support the value propositions? That's probably a direction I would take it to, is like, what are you actually getting from people and what's resonating with them? And that's the data that you use to support like that urgency, severity thing. And one of the, like, while we're on the evidence side of that, that's how the mistake usually happens, is that when founders, and I have a tendency to do this too, we get myopic, and so we have a solution idea in mind. So when we talk to universities, for example, we're listening for the parts that align and not for the parts that don't. And so like when we start hearing about, if we listen to also hear the other 14 problems, it doesn't mean we have to solve them. Most of the time we don't, but we at least need to understand where that, like if they stack rank and like where do we rank in that. We don't necessarily need to solve the number one problem. That would be cool. But if we're solving 3 problems and none of them are in the top 5, that's probably like no good, right? And so you have to like be listening for all those other things too. And so I think the evidence starts that as well. So let's see, what else is going on for GEW today? What do you got going on here?
So we had our session 1 with Brent Sands from Impound Comics. We had this one. We have the fourth wave investor showcases going on virtually right now. And then we have at 12 here, we have Meet the Entrepreneur. So it's 2 founders, Renetta Jenick from Foodum, and then Dr. Poos from Elevate Labs, talking about how students can hop into startups and what that mindset they need to have in engaging, and then also how startups can bring students on early in their startup journey. And then I know later we have a panel discussion up in Roseville, funded and scaled, is that conversation, and that will be at 5:30 at the Roseville Venture Lab. I know there's one in between.
But I'm sure the schedule is all online.
It's all online, yes, thank you. I was just trying to go off of memory there. But yeah, you can just type in GEW Sacramento, and that's the first link, and there's a calendar in there to register. Mainly just registrations asked just so you get a parking pass, and you can park on campus for free.
Yay!
We know that's a barrier to you coming.
It is. And I parked in a different garage than I normally do today, and I had to like find my way here.
Nice. We saw another part of campus.
I did, and I normally just drive by that part of campus, but then I'm like, this feels so much closer to the library, but only if I go through a building.
The Union?
Yeah, I parked in 2. Yeah.
My ears are full of ring con trying to start out, these are up too much. My ears are ring con that.
All right. So I think we'll probably call it there. So this concludes kind of our live part here. Thanks for hosting me here.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was fantastic. So next week is Thanksgiving, so I won't be back there, but I will be back December 1st at 10 a.m. So if you want to hop on, again, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook Live, you can. You can also submit a question in advance. I think that link is in the description of wherever you're watching this, but if not, I will throw it on the screen here, and you can just actually ask a question at that URL over there, and you can submit a video one too. If you submit a video one, I'll play it on the air. It's not as cool as being here in person. I'll have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, I would love to. This was fun. I enjoyed it, and we had some good questions and good dialogue. So thanks for the opportunity and being a part of GEW. And again, love to elevate things that are going on a regular basis. And I know you've been bringing this to not only the Sacramento ecosystem, but to entrepreneurs all around, I would say probably the globe. So I'm excited to elevate your work and appreciate all you do to support the Carlsen Center and entrepreneurs in our community.
Well, likewise, man. Thanks for putting so much work into putting SAC on the map when it comes to entrepreneurship. Like some of our viewers here are not connected because of the Carlsen Center, and they're not local.
There you go, our extended community. So we're still waiting for you to move on down, June, but we'll help you find.
I wasn't gonna name names, but man.
Hey, we all know the June's in the room.
All right, cool. Well, have a fantastic weekend, everyone, and I'll see you guys in a couple weeks.
All right.